Welcome. Hello. My name's Joel. This is building a payment system on open source. Before we get started, this is my first fintech DEF CON. I'm excited to be here. I think it's fun. I don't know, learning about it and seeing a lot of these talks. I'm fairly new to Moov and what they're building, but it's been an eye-opening conference. So before I even begin, a big kudos to our sponsors and to the organizers. I know this kind of conference isn't easy to pull off. So I'm Joel. I'm a software engineer at GitHub. I work on the usage and subscription billing platform there. Prior to that, I was working on a global marketplace as well as doing subscription payment systems. From the start of my software engineering career, I've somehow always been involved in the payment system and gravitated towards it. I think it's a really exciting area to dig into. It's full of really fun challenges, scalability, bugs. There's just a lot that goes on there. And it's an area that I also think a lot about. And the goal of this workshop is to explore how we can use open source to build production quality payment systems. If you saw the abstract, I said production ready, from 0 to production ready. But spoiler, this is a 90-minute workshop. I don't know if I've ever built anything in 90 minutes that I call production ready. If you have, that's awesome. We're going to be using a toy application, and it's more about exploring production concepts that we can apply and seeing how those fit into actual deployments and actually what we're doing. And seeing how we can use open source solutions to bootstrap our systems to get off the ground and running. There's a lot of knowledge in this room. I think you all probably have diverse backgrounds. And so it's a workshop, so I want to keep it informal. So if you have questions, comments, maybe something makes you knee-jerk and you hate what I said, feel free to speak out. It's more than okay. I want to learn from you just as much as sharing what I've learned over the years. So when I think about production ready and the concepts that I care about, there's really top 5 recently that I've been thinking about. It tends to fluctuate based on what I'm working on. These days, I'm doing a lot of distributed systems and writing Ruby and Rails. There's a really fun joke I heard about Ruby that a PR is 99% asking if something can be nil. And so with the distributed system, I think it's 99% asking what if it goes down. And so my top 5 things that I'm thinking about in a payment system has a lot to do with uptime and monitoring. So what I care a lot about is independency from your payment service provider. I don't know if you've worked in an application where you have integration that directly maps to something like Stripe or Braintree, and then if you have to do a migration or you want to change how you bill, it's really difficult. And so generally when I'm working on an integration, I want to make sure that I can be decoupled from them. And that especially goes with things like auditing and debugging. I hate if I work in a system that I have to go into the payment service provider's dashboard just to understand what happened with the charge, understand how we got into a certain state. So that's a really big tenet for me. Observability as far as network calls, what's happening across the wire, the rate of payments, the amounts. Same goes with monitoring our failure and success rates, recoverability, and graceful degradation. And so these are some topics I want to explore as we go through the application, and I'll get a little bit more concrete with them as we go through. So the agenda is 5 minutes. I'm going to talk about what I mean by payment system, a little bit about open source, and then we'll have about 30 to 45 minutes for the coding walkthrough. We'll see if Docker works for us. Maybe it will. I'm actually not going to live code. I'm going to show you code. I'm not brave enough to attempt to write code up here. And then 5 minutes going further and some Q&A. So there's some buffer time there. We may not take the whole time up, but we'll see what happens. So payment system's pretty broad. I think we have folks working in all areas, whether you're in acquiring, processing, issuing. And so in this really simple graph, you have your app that you're building, or you're working with. You have your PSP and then the bank where you get your money. And so when I'm talking about payment systems for this workshop, what I'm interested in is the stuff that makes that happen in the square. So what makes money movement happen? and everything between that. So how are we charging? What's triggering that? How are we invoicing? How are we reconciling with our finance teams? I think it's a very broad area, but it's also really small, I think, in the grand scheme of payments. And so I haven't worked much with things like ACH or the actual like card processing. I think that's completely separate. I don't know if there's a better term, but I like to use payment system and billing for the area that I'm thinking about. It comes in a lot of different varieties. So you handle your billing, your dunning, your receipts and invoicing, fraud prevention, taxes, promotions, refunds. I think that's a short list. I think the bullets could probably drop to the floor. I could keep going for a few columns there. Then we have a lot of variations. You have one-time purchases, you have subscriptions, marketplace, usage-based, credits, and arrears, proration, and then everything in between. So payment systems tend to be different for each one. When I think about what I've worked at in the marketplace, that was about charging a customer and dispersing funds. Subscriptions about recurring billing and having a really good dunning process, and it kind of your payment system ends up changing based on what you're doing, and I think that's what's part of the fun. Generally, payments take a team. I don't think I've ever heard of a SaaS that has grown and scaled and then not had to grow their payments team. If your team has yet to grow and you've scaled and done a lot of really complex things, I would love to figure out how you're doing that. But there is a caveat here. I know there's plenty of applications out there that can get up and running using something like Stripe Checkout. I think Stripe's been doing a lot of really great no-code, low-code solutions. You can get really far with these. And I think they're actually a really great step to see if you can use those to power your application before you actually need to start taking on your own, rolling your own kind of functionality around there. When it comes to building a payment system, when you start rolling your own, that's a cost. That's something that you have to upkeep and manage. There's a lot of complexity there, and it starts to build on itself. So in the workshop, we're to go through how we can do billing without using some built-in features like subscription and recurring billing. But the main point here is I'm not saying don't use these solutions. They have a time and a place, and it's worth leveraging that as a tool. So open source and how this is going to fit in. If you were to ask me about 5 years ago if I would consider using an open source solution as a core tenet in billing, I probably would say no. In my experience, it's felt like there's so many nuances to a billing system that there's no way that something out there can actually fit in there and meet our needs without having to be drastically changed. But in recent years, there's been a few projects that I've worked on, and mostly it's been about either extracting payments out of an application into a modular monolith or completely moving to a distributed system. That's changed my mind. To the point now today, I think it's absolutely something that we could check out and something that I would consider. And I think one of the things that's shifted in my mind is as I've moved billing applications outside of its original home, it's kind of forced me to think about generics and how you can decouple your domain logic and your business logic away from payments. And I've started to see a lot of common patterns with the kind of modeling that I'm doing or the way that payments are set up. And it's really not as complex as I think it is or ingrained. And what happens is a lot of complexity with our systems is because we couple together application behavior with billing to the point where it's hard to tease apart. And in these exercises of pulling billing out of applications, it's become really evident that there is a way that you can do this in a way that's sustainable. It doesn't have to be complex. This isn't a silver bullet. I don't think that if you use some really great primitives that you're all of a sudden going to have an easy payment system. There's still challenges and complexity to manage there. I also like open source because it's a lot of learning opportunities. This is decades of experience of models and systems at our fingertips. So whether or not you want to use a system that's open source, I think it's still a great area to learn from and to read the code, see how they model things, and use it as inspiration. A good case study of this, I think, is Spree Commerce. They have been around for years, but it's probably one of the most advanced open source e-commerce solutions out there. I thought about doing a workshop on this, but it's too easy. You can Docker up and you're production ready, essentially. They have it split up so it scales well. They have the front end split from the back end. There's a lot of really great things. I especially love their domain model and the way they did line items and orders and invoicing. I think it's really flexible, and that's when I first thought about how leveraging open source is really valuable. In the past, I've seen companies roll their own system and ends up having large models of like a transaction table with 95 columns or something absurd instead of using proper line items or using what's like real invoicing. And so that's how I landed on Spree, and I used their domain as inspiration on how to actually model something that you can audit and actually give customers what they want as far as invoicing and receipts. If you haven't checked out Spree, definitely look at it. It's a really fun one. So what we're going to be building, I work at GitHub, and the inspiration from this is that at GitHub you pay for an access to a pro plan, and that gives you access to things like actions and CI and packages and registry, and then you can use those and then you get billed for overages. So what we're going to work on building is a product that has monthly, yearly subscriptions that give you your access, and then we're going to have a tiered pricing for metered usage. So the monthly and yearly subscription is going to be billed up front, so you're going to pay that immediately when you start your subscription, and then the tiered pricing will be billed in arrears. So that's going to be after the end of the month, when your billing cycle renews, we're going to bill that way. What I think is fun is I can put both of those on a slide and actually accomplish that in a workshop. I think both of those are substantial things to bill for and to build. So this is just really cool that there's open source that can do this. And the way we're going to do it is through this project called Lago. It's relatively new. I learned about them in the past year. And it's open source billing, and they have hosted and self-hosted options. I'm not affiliated with them or anything. This isn't a pitch. It's just a project that I have stumbled on. I think it's really cool. They're in their alpha stage. I think they have production customers. But it's a really fun project to look at. It's also in Ruby, so I'm a Rubyist, and so it's really easy for me to dig into it. And so,
Why do you not Ruby, by the way?
Sorry, what's the question?
Why do you not Ruby?
Why do I do Ruby?
No, why do you love it?
Oh, why do I love it? I don't know if actually I do love Ruby. It's just what I've been using. Actually, what's fun is in payments, I want static types, and so. Anecdote, my team right now is integrating sorbet into our Ruby, our billing system, so we can get static types. When it comes with money, I don't like asking if it's nil or zero. I just want to know. So this is a fun project. It handles a lot. It does subscriptions, meter usage, proration, plan configuration, invoicing, usage monitoring, aggregation. It's a lot of functionality built into it, which is, I think, pretty neat to get out of a project. So our integration with the app we're going to be building is mostly a matter of setting up your infrastructure and then connecting APIs. Other than that, we're going to be leveraging a lot of what they have to offer. And so before we actually get into the app, I do want to talk a quick bit about the flow here. And so this is going to be a simplified model of it, but our application, the customer is going to create their payment method. We're going to create that customer object in our PSP. If you've used Stripe or Braintree, you're probably familiar with this. You make an API call there. And the way that Lago is going to work is that we're going to then create that customer and assign a plan to them. So that's another API call. And then our application listens for a webhook from Lago, because what they're going to do is once that plan is created, in our case, we're doing a plan we're going to bill immediately. We're going to bill on the day that someone signs up and then prorate them. And so we're going to wait for a webhook that comes back that says the invoice is created, and then our application is going to charge that customer. Lago is billing our payment service provider agnostic. So all the charging you can handle on your own. You can use anything you want to use for that. They do have an option. There's a little asterisk. You can't really see it, but it's between Lago and the PSP. Where they can integrate directly with your PSP for you and do the charging. But for the example of this workshop, I wanted to explore doing it with our own and handling that logic ourselves. I think they're also planning on adding a lot more integrations, which I think could simplify this architecture a bit. So what's really unique about this, I think, is non-standard, is that in your normal,
Quick question.
yes?
In addition to Mongo, do we use some other open source components in this workshop?
There will be one more that we're going to leverage. But another spoiler, I'm misusing it, but I think it's a really great project, but I wanted to show it. And then I'll mention a few at the end as well, but Lago is going to be the main project that we're using.
And then the next workshops are focused on the Webhooks, right? I'm new to the board. It's called the Webhooks.
They're next to
Yeah, I'm wondering, that's more a banking open source
Mm-hmm.
yeah, it's new.
project?
Oh, the neobank primitive workshop?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. Yeah, this one, yeah, that's a very, I think that's kind of when I was talking about the scope of payment systems, very different scope. What they're building is probably stuff that I've never touched before. And this is definitely going to be more about a workshop integrating with the billing components of the application. So if that's not what you signed up for, it's not going to hurt my feelings if you're more interested in the banking side of it.
I'm just wondering
Yeah.
what are the open source, I'm new to the
Yeah.
finance industry, I'm wondering what are the open source projects or components that are available
Yeah.
to build payment or new bank or other financial services. So that's why
Yeah, definitely.
I'm asking the question.
Yeah, and on that note too, like if anyone thinks of other projects that you think could fit in anywhere, don't hesitate to call it out. There's so many out there that I really only looked at some of the ones that I immediately knew about or were written in Ruby, just for ease. But I know the ecosystem is wide. I know if PHP is your jam, there's so many PHP billing projects. I think WooCommerce is a really big one. So there's a lot out there for us. So going back to like this, your typical checkout, I think if you go to sign up for a product, you fill out your username, password, you sign up for it, email, you go through a checkout process, collect your payment method, hit submit, you get charged, and you have access to the app. What changes here with using this project is that now payment collection is asynchronous, and so maybe later, if the payment fails, we'd have to do some kind of dunning or whatnot. We could say we're going to make our call to Lago, and then we're going to wait and pull until we get them access, but that's a pretty bad user experience. We're doing a self-hosted solution here, but even on 200, 400 milliseconds on our own network, waiting for that to happen is, I think, still pretty awful. And I'm curious if anyone has any reactions to giving someone access before payment collection, if that makes anyone alarmed or not. Or, right, is it alarming?
Yeah, the risk like someone gives you a fake credit card number,
Mhm.
and now you have fraudsters using your services for free, and
Yeah.
using all those GitHub action instances to mine Bitcoin and stuff.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so there's an entry for fraud. As I was thinking about that, I feel like there's got to be a way we can mitigate this. And then what I came up with is that because we have to first create the customer within the PSP and the payment method, most of the fraud that I've seen in subscription services or applications is credit card fraud. GitHub doesn't use, or not GitHub, like pretty much every software company I've worked for, it doesn't really use banking to pay. You can usually pay with like PayPal. But it's mostly credit cards. But we have the option to pre-auth. And so one thing we can do is pre-auth for the plan ahead of time. And so that way we at least know we have the funds available. And so that can reduce our risk a little bit. Another thing we can do is make sure that payment collection portion is blazingly fast. So keep our monitoring on that and making sure that we know our times and set SLOs up around that. And I think that the trade-off here, though, that I think is really neat about this is that now if our internal billing system, so if we're running Lago self-hosted, maybe we've made edits to it, it's ours, we've got lots of functionality going on, maybe it goes down for some reason, a regression, or someone digs through our network cable. We can still have our app function. So as long as our payment service provider is up, we can still provide access, and it goes a long way. Nines are really expensive the more you add on, And I think this is a really great way to get some additional nines for a pretty low cost. So yeah, it kind of gives us this ability to do graceful degradation for free. I think the more that we can take a billing system outside of that core flow and make sure our application can still function without having to be reliant on it is going to be a really nice tool to have. A lot of times I've seen dashboards or pages that are so dependent on being able to request a billing. Maybe they want to get an invoice or get the amount that someone's due, that you see a 500. And I think graceful degradation is going to be greater than a 500 in a lot of cases. Again, this is going to vary based on your tolerance in your application. So yeah, we're going to hand wave over some of this. The workshop's going to be in Ruby and Rails. If that's not your jam, then I invite you just to kind of follow along with the concepts. And so like what I really want to focus on more is not so much the code, but how we're doing it and how we're integrating, and to see what we can do with it. I'm intentionally not doing payment method collection just because everyone have to set up a PSP test account, yada, yada. So we're going to kind of just gloss over that and pretend that our service is doing that for us transparently. We're going to focus more on this 2 through 4. So coding time, no QR code, I'm sorry, but this is the repo if you want to follow along. I will be going through it as well on my laptop in case you don't want to do any coding yourself. I'll just leave this up for a moment. I added Docker for this like 5 minutes before because I thought that might be easier if you don't have a Ruby environment. Your mileages may vary. I'm really not great at Docker, so I don't know if I did it all correctly for you. And I haven't actually tested it out besides starting up the Rails server. So if you're good to use Docker, you're a pioneer, and thank you. Lago will be Docker. It's already there. Their Docker file, it's much better. And so we'll be using that, and I'll be doing it on localhost. I'm going to switch over. Is anyone actually planning on coding along and with this or not? No. It's okay if you're, okay. In that case, then I'm going to do less waiting on people to follow along with it and just kind of go through it. I think what could be fun to do, because we'll probably finish early this way, is we can interact with Lago. If you don't want to use Ruby, you can interact with it through curl, or even just kind of play around with some of these open source projects locally, if you'd like to. But so what I'll do is I'll get it running so far, and we'll go through some of the steps here. So this is the application, and for good measure, we'll just do a quick bundle install to make sure that it's running or everything's down. And then we're going to start our server. I know you've all been waiting to see what application it is we're building and how pretty it is, to see how much effort I put into the CSS. So it's going to be exciting here. It's look at that. That's good looking. So we're using the basic sign-up form. Going through this just so I can at least show you some of the functionality. So this application is called Pay to Wait. You pay for a yearly subscription, and then you send off events, and we tell you how long to sit and wait. Pretty creative, I know. But it's a really great way to do consumption. So these buttons do nothing right now. And so what we're going to do is we're going to go through how do we make it so we can get that subscription billed for, and then how can we start admitting usage for it, and how can we charge the customer. And so I mentioned that I'm not going to do live code for you on here, so we're going to go through kind of some of the steps here. I'm making use of this gem called Rails Pay, or Pay Rails. And this is made by Chris Oliver. Again, it's a Ruby project. I really wanted to incorporate this because I think it does domain modeling really well. I mentioned it here, but it sets up the billing system with a customer, payment methods, subscriptions, charges, webhooks. And what it does that I think is really key is that it models everything around a customer object. I don't know if anyone else has worked in an app where you have your payments is connected to the user and how difficult that makes it whenever you want to start introducing teams or organizations, or your user model gets so large that you want to start splitting things off. It's really difficult to do that. And I think the PayGem here is a really great way to bootstrap a system with some really sane starting points and for models for billing. I know Chris Oliver uses this app he has like 4 different subscription services, and he uses this in production along with a few other people. So you could today clone this, add it to your Rails app, and if you want to leverage Braintree and Stripe's subscription and billing, it handles that for you. So I think it's a really great app. Gem. I'm severely misusing it because we're not going to be using the subscription or the magic that it does behind the scenes. I just wanted to use it for the domain model purpose of it. So if Chris, if you ever see this, I'm sorry for what I did to your gem, but I wanted to show it to people, and I think that that's something. So I mentioned already these light bulbs are things that I wanted to call out. That's really small, so we're gonna make that a little bigger. It centers around the customer object, decouples the users, and also I'll show here. So if we go to the docs for it, we can see that it. Oh, that's my app. Nah. You can see the API here, but if we go to charges, what I like is that everything is user payment processor that returns your customer object and then charge. And so it's agnostic of your PSP. The implementation of it has nothing to do with Stripe or Braintree or PayPal. And I think that goes a long way, especially if you're using multiple payment service providers in your app. The more you can get away from modeling off of them and away from specifics to them, the better it's going to be for engineers, for when you want to make changes, and just for how you communicate it out to other teams who are using your services. And so this is one of the projects I think is just fun to read through to see how it's modeled. And one of the big reasons I wanted to use it again was because I think this is a really great way to model things out. There's another really popular gem called Active Merchant that's used a lot by Spreedly. And I think it's Shopify made it originally. That does the same thing, where it gives you payment processor that can be through multiple gateways to give you kind of all the adaptability without having to change your interface. It also does async webhook processing. So webhooks come in, it listens to it, stores it in the database, and then processes them. I think that's often overlooked in billing systems where people try to synchronously handle the webhooks by reacting to them, which causes problems if you have a regression and that webhook fails and the payment service provider doesn't have retries. Then you just lost a webhook, or your system's down and then the retries trigger and you have a thundering herd on your hands. In general, it's just better to just store that webhook ephemerally if you want to in some sort of database, process it, and then that way you can always reprocess if you need to, and without having to get any retries done. So first we're gonna get Logos set up. And so I'm gonna run this in a separate one. I'm already in here, so it's pretty simple. Yes, yeah. How's that?
Yeah.
So we'll do Docker compose up, and we'll get Logo running. It's going to go really fast for me because I already have the images set up. If you do it, it's probably going to take a little bit longer. And then what this gives us is we have the admin running on port or not just on 8080, and then we have an API on port 3000. And so if we pop over here, we go to localhost, we get our admin page. And so we're going to go ahead and sign up. Fintech DevCon is going to be our organization. And signed up. So first thing we need to do for this application to get this working is we need plans to charge for. So you can configure these plans programmatically, but for the sake of brevity and just to kind of focus more on the coding side of things, we can use their admin portal for this as well. I think it's actually kind of cool because one of the projects we're working on at GitHub is building this kind of portal for teams to do instead of us programmatically doing it, because it gets product launches off of the engineers and more onto configuration. So I think this is really kind of nice to get for free, that we have the ability to create plans and to do add-ons and coupons, et cetera here. So we're going to do our subscription plans that are billed monthly, that are prorated. And so we're going to have our monthly plan. We're going to make that plan code monthly. I'll have an interval, and we'll say this one is $25. And it's a pay the plan in advance, because we want to do it as the second that you sign up for it, you're going to get charged for it. And oops, actually, sorry, we skipped the step, so we're going to go back one more here. The plans have add-ons, or have charges associated with them, and so we're going to have our plan, but then we're also going to have our usage business, our usage billing on top of that. So what we're here is we're going to add our billable metrics first, and these are the events that you're sending off that we're emitting from an application. In the demo app, in that case, that's the amount of time that we're waiting. So we're going to set up 2 billable metrics here. And I already forgot what I named these. Oh yeah, just sum, okay. So we're going to call this sum minutes. Has anyone here worked with usage-based billing before? Or works in like a metering? Just curious. Okay. It's really cool that we can do this, that we're getting this off the ground running. It's really challenging to do metered usage, especially when you start getting your scale up and you have the events and you're doing your aggregation. A lot of things go wrong. If you're not, your pipeline's not fast enough and you don't get your events in time before the billing period ends, you lose money. Getting aggregations for the customer and calculating their usage can be challenging when you start having millions of records. So it's really cool that we can set these up and get certain types of aggregation for free without having to worry about how it's set up, modeling it, or doing indexing. We're just using a form and creating it, which I think is really cool. So we're going to do an aggregation sum. So we're going to sum your minutes up, charge it at the end of the month, and we're just going to call this one minutes. It gives you a little snippet over here. You can't really see it, but if you wanted to do it in the console through curl, you can do that. So cool, we've got a billable metric, and now we're going to create that plan. So we have that $25 a month. We're going to add a charge. We're going to do sum of minutes. And then we're going to do graduated pricing. So again, this is also really cool that we get this for free. We're going to allow the customer to get, we'll say, 10 units for free. And we'll say that's $0. And then anything above that, we're going to charge 50 cents for every minute they wait. And this is going to reset on their billing cycle. We'll go and add that plan. And now we're going to do our yearly plan here. And let's see how I set this one up. I think I did it. Everything just times, yeah. We have it for $250. And now we're going to do, down here, we're going to do this first. Sum of minutes. Graduate again. And we're going to hit this apply charges monthly, which I think is going to be really critical. Otherwise, if we didn't charge for the usage on the monthly basis, we wouldn't get our payments until the year subscription. So this lets us have the yearly subscription, but then get monthly overages, which is pretty cool. And then in this case, what we'll do is we'll give 1,200 units this time. So we'll give them a little bit more since they're paying yearly up front. And then everything else after that will be 50 cents. So cool, we got both of our plans set up.
Quick question.
Yeah.
This plan set up is part of that software, right? Where they provide you a portal and you can set it up. Is that fair?
Yeah, so all this was through their portal, yeah.
Docker compose and you started the service, right?
Right.
That's it.
Yep. Yeah, so the Docker Compose starts up their API as well as their front end. And so that was their admin front end running locally that I set up. Yeah. And this is the exact same, if you're paying for hosting through them and using their service, it's the exact same application. They just also have it open source, which is fun. So to send customer data to Lago, we need to send that customer with their plan. So we're going to pretend that when you hit this button over here, that part of the flow is collecting the payment method, sending it to Stripe or Braintree or whatever, and then going on to the next step. So we're just going to pretend that happens. So to do this, we got to add their web client. So they have clients for Ruby, Node, other languages as well. Set up our environment variables, set the client up. So again, no one's following along or coding this, so we're going to just keep moving along here. And then we're going to create a background job to subscribe. If we look back here, this connection from the application to Lago is a point of failure. And so if we were just to do that synchronous call during the checkout flow and our payment service, our self-hosted option is down, then we have an outage. And so we want to use a background job. You could use Kafka if you want to do queuing. You could use PubSub, but something between the application and our instance so we get that resiliency and we remove that dependence on there. And that's probably an area that we'd want to have an SLO around, so that uptime. We want to make sure that we're not having outages of days, that it's when we do have failures, it's maybe minutes at most. And so in this example, we're creating a job and we're making it on the urgent queue because we want to have it to make sure it's always processed. And then the code is, I'll make this a little bigger here. The code connect is that we create that customer. I'm sending the customer user ID. If this was their hosted option, I probably want to make an external UUID. But whenever I'm passing customer IDs internally, I tend to think that it's okay to use the primary key. And it kind of helps with debugging when you're mapping together. Otherwise, you have to kind of join all your services together. But yeah, again, if you're not internal and you're doing this to their hosted, you'd want to have your own ID. Creating a subscription is pretty easy. You just use the client, you create the subscription, you pass that plan code. It handles all the prorations, which is very much welcomed. If I don't have to do any calendar math, I'm pretty excited. And so this is going to charge them, since we're doing calendar monthly. You can do it based on anniversary, but because it's doing calendar, it's going to prorate you for just how much out of $25, and there's 5 days left in the month. You'll only have to pay that portion of it. So that's really great to get for free. If you're not familiar with anniversary, that would be, if I signed up today, I would be billed on September 25th. But doing calendar is the default here that we're going to leverage. And then here we're using that pay gem. I'm sorry, I'm misusing, but I think I still like the way that it works. And I think the API is still really cool. So we have the user payment processor and we're subscribing. So we're going to put that default plan for them. The plan code here is going to be, in most cases, monthly, and then that processor ID. If you use this gem, this would actually be subscribing in the payment service provider. So if you're in Stripe or Braintree, the gem would be handling that for you, which is pretty cool. Again, I just think it's a really great project. But sorry, Chris, for this. Subscription controller. We're going to create a job. It's going to be, again, later because we want to have that resiliency so we're not having too much. Oh, sorry, no, I skipped. Yeah, okay. Yeah, so there's that job here that I was talking about. So we're having that so we don't have to have that dependence. And we're going to schedule that job. It's going to run later, and then we'll get that subscription to the user. So what I'm going to do is just check out that code path. Actually, we'll go and go to the next section, then we'll come back because it'll all fit together. That's subscribing the customer. Now we need to charge. And so the way we charge, we listen for the webhook. Logo can be configured to send webhooks to any destination that you want. This is really cool because you can send it to one endpoint and then have that replicated elsewhere. If you want to do revenue reconciliation, if you want to go to your analytics or business intelligence, you can fan it out to pretty much anywhere you want to. I think that's really powerful. So that way you can kind of send the data to where it needs to be and process it there. In my case, I'm running it on localhost. If anyone does use Docker, it'd probably be a different mapping, but Logo's running in Docker. I'm not, so the webhook's going to be host Docker internal. And then we're going to create a webhook model. This is so that we can store that, store the webhook locally, or sorry, persist it so that we can always retry it if we need to. And when it comes time to process that webhook, we want to check the signature of it and verify the sender. I can't tell you how many projects I've been in where webhooks come in from like Stripe or Braintree and there's no secret checking or signature verification, which is just a recipe for danger. If you don't, someone could figure it out, send webhooks that aren't actually from your PSP, and then you're in for a bad time. And so good practice here is to get that key from your provider. For Logo, what you do is you make a request to your instance, you pull the public key down. I have it set up in Rails to do it on initialization, so it does it once instead of every time the webhook comes in. And then here we have that actual code for the webhook and the controller that we have. We're checking the signature here to verify that it's indeed from our Logo instance. We return false. We're gonna if it's not, and then we're gonna store it in the database so that we can get away from retries and then reprocess if we need to. And then we're gonna go ahead and put that into a job to do the processing. And create some routes there. And so now that we have the webhook, we need to charge money. And so Logo has a few different webhooks available. We can pull this up. So this is the different messages that they'll send, so the invoice created, some add-ons, payment failure, event errors, et cetera. The one that we're interested in here is the invoice created. When they create the invoice, based on subscription being assigned to the customer, they send us this, and then we're going to take that and know what to charge our customer. And so we do that through a pretty simple worker. And so we have our webhook that we're going to find. We're going to grab the invoice ID out, the customer ID, the amount that we want to charge. So Logo is going to tell us this is going to be that prorated amount based on the remainder of this month, the billing month. And then we're going to charge that customer. The pay gem here raises a pay error on failure. The way you want to handle the payment processing failures just really varies based on your application. In most cases, I think retries are acceptable. Granted, if your payment failure is because of an invalid CVC or for expiration, you probably don't want to retry that. There's really no purpose. So I think one of the big things to do is when you're using multiple processors, understand their error codes and then handle them accordingly. GitHub, most of our jobs have resiliency baked into them as helpers, and you can define which errors that you want to retry on. You can just find the retry strategy. And so that's definitely something that I think we'd want to add and have that retry logic available. And then additionally, with processing, a lot of Stripe, I think itself has a idempotency key baked into the client now, but not all processors have that. And so a really good idea too is understand how your processor does idempotency. If supported, I like to pass the transaction ID or the charge or whatever I'm billing, so that way, at least I know that I'm not going to double charge someone. Double subscriptions is different than double charging. I don't think there should ever be a case of double charging. Sometimes subscriptions sync more than once. Logo has idempotency keys for subscriptions too, which I think is really cool. So that can help prevent that as well. Then we update their invoice. So I did all this synchronously in a job. Chances are you want to split some of this out, handle the other webhooks. In addition to this, I didn't include instrumentation, so I didn't want to set up Datadog for a workshop. But I personally really enjoy putting monitoring around as many webhooks as possible, especially with payments, money movements, invoicing errors, because I find that they're the first indicators of regressions or fraud or just things happening in our system. You can go overboard with it though and have really angry on-call shifts with people if you try to do too much and have really loose anomalies. But I can't count how many times I've seen a spike in payment failures, credit card attachment attempts fail, that have been able to quickly catch regressions during canary deployments. And webhooks are a really great way to tap into that. And so in this case, I think we can add monitoring around pretty much all of the webhooks that Lago offers, and probably as well as our payment processors that we're using. And then you can set your learning up based on those and your thresholds. So that's where we're going to go next. So that code for our application here, I think that was step 3, webhook in charge. So really quick code. I used a lot of Rails scaffolding to get this up and running. I would never run this app in production. I took, again, a lot of pointers, but I think the concepts here are things that I would be doing and the way that I've mostly set them up with reason. And so now with that running, we gotta make sure we run our migrations, of course. I didn't even try to live code and I still got bit by it, but that's an easy one. So we're gonna sign up for a monthly plan. I don't do a lot of front end, so Rails 7 has this turbo thing that I don't know how to do, so you have to refresh. And now we have, oh cool, we're subscribed. So if we pop over to Lago here, and we look at our customers, and there's no customer. Live code's fun. So now is going to be the fun debug moment here. Oh yes. You should probably set up your webhooks. If you do this, which I skipped over because we weren't live coding, we need a webhook event. And so we'll go over. Well, where's my endpoint? There it is. I'm going to grab this. Now I didn't do plans cancellation, so I'm going to do a completely new account here just to make it more clean to look at. This is going to be my other self backwards. And then Joel. And we're signed up, and now do monthly, refresh. Well, that's unfortunate. Let's see. I'm going to check out a different branch and see if I just don't let my coding project deter you from trying out this kind of project. It was working today. So that's pretty much par for the course though. I was warned about this. So let's see if this is gonna do. Yeah, it's not gonna work. We're gonna try this one more time. Now we're just gonna get messy because it's well then. Okay, it's not working. We'll do a quick debug here, see if we can find it. I'm gonna make this a little smaller for myself. Yeah. You should probably have your API key as well. That's really good for connecting to your payment service providers or your hosted solutions. It goes a long way, so they say. User error, okay. Developers, API keys. Nope. Yeah, we'll just get this reset. Oh. And there we go. Now we're back. All right, back to our composure. So we'll do proper name again. And sign up. Get our monthly. Refresh. There we go. So we have a charge, amount in cents, $5.65, because that's prorated, $25. Yay. That was nerve-wracking. Does anyone not use cents for their payments and their money? Does anyone use floats or big decimal? I met big decimal people before. I didn't know if there's any in here. Another, I didn't incorporate it here, but I think most languages now have a money wrapper or some sort of way to deal with money. Rails has the money gem, and so that way you don't have to worry about any division, et cetera, errors or kind of how you do currency. That's 100% something that I would add here, but for this great application, we're just going to put you down with cents. You pop over to Lago, you can look at their dashboard, and we'll see that there's my account, monthly subscription. We'll see the invoice there is succeeded. Our API call worked. We listened and we charged. And then what I really like is now we have invoicing too for free. So that's great. And I think that's a good looking invoice, I think, for not doing anything. And now we can do some events. So take my money. We were going to wait for 47 minutes. We just paid 50 cents per minute on that. And we're going to go back over here. They have an API for this, but I didn't integrate it for the workshop. But you can see here your usage, and there's 47 units. So it's doing the aggregation for us. And we see our rolling total at the end of this month give you an $1850 bill, which is pretty fun. I think we can also, what I wanted to also show is the yearly plan when we do that. And so if we say our yearly person, sign up for yearly, and we should see that customer, which is cool. Their first invoice, unless I didn't set that up right in my system, and we're just going to skip over this example. Yep, okay, so there's a bug in my code for this one. But monthly works, so there we go. Thanks for bearing with me, that's fun. Yeah, everyone's doing monthly. It's more money, I guess, for us. No discounts for anybody. But the whole point of the yearly that I think is neat is that your invoicing splits it out for you. And so you'll see your yearly subscription of, for our case, I think we did $100, $250. And then the next subscription will have $0 for that, but then it'll have your overage fees for your usage-based billing. So I think it's pretty good for the customer to see that. It makes it really simple for us. That wasn't very much code. And we got, I think, some of the hardest parts of metered billing and subscription for free, proration, discounts. We have aggregation there, all just through a pretty simple integration. And I think it's fun too is this project is seeing what they did it with. There's not very many objects here that they're working with. And I think this is what's kind of convinced me more that it is possible to have a payment system, even for something as complex as GitHub, where you can have more kind of primitive objects that are easier to model and are flexible. GitHub doesn't use this project or use open source projects for it, but we're currently splitting a lot of things out, and this is where I've started to see a lot of the parallels where I see it could work. And if I was to do this again, I'd probably consider a project like this. So back to this. There's just a few more that I wanted to mention. Shopify, I guess I'm a big fan of Shopify now that I see all these open source projects. They have a really great ways for testing out the areas that I think a lot about as far as graceful degradation, resiliency. Toxie proxy is a really fun one. It lets you wrap any kind of connection you have and then kind of chaos test it in your test suites. So if you want to have Redis go down, your payment service provider go down, you can use that. Simian is a circuit breaker pattern. These are all Ruby projects, but it's also really great to leverage if you want to for your projects. Shopify Money is a big one. Kill Bill is another billing platform. It's been around for a long time now, like over 5 years, maybe 10 years. It's made by Groupon, so it came out of their billing system. And it's one that I've had a lot of fun with. It's a Java application. I don't know Java, so when I try to read it, I don't really make sense of most of it or how to navigate the project. But what I love about it is it does auditability really well. You can pull it down, play with it. It has a Docker app, but you'll see state transitions with your payment service providers for every step of the way. And so it's really easy to see where a payment went wrong in a certain flow. And so I think it's one that's really worth checking out and playing with. I pulled the way it does transaction handling from them into applications I built because I liked it so much. And there's plenty more. These are all Ruby and a Java one. But that's it. Thanks for bearing with me on the demo and hanging out.
Joe, we have a question.
Yeah, question.
So looking at Lago, it's like really cool. It's also pretty early in its development cycle. It's like 0.6 or something.
It is.
So how do you like balance choosing something that like is 50% of the way what you need, like trying to add onto it while maybe the roadmap they have for that project is different than what you need?
Yeah. I was supposed to be repeating questions, so I'm going to summarize that question. Lago is a very new project, alpha, and how I would reconcile that with my product needs, essentially, and that changing roadmap. And I think that's a tough one. I think it depends. I think if I was in a new application, I would need at least 50% or more, I think, of it. So if it's outside the base cases, I think it's a really great candidate. It is open source, and so if you fork it, you can keep using it. It is a BGL license, so if you do fork it, you have to have a license if it's private or open source it. I kind of bullish, though, on these kind of projects because I've seen things like Spree that have really developed over time and pull in a lot of expertise and a lot of knowledge. And so the more of those, and if I can have a hand in contributing it and having a company that does that, I would. But I think it does vary. I think one thing I'm really interested to see is how they scale aggregation, because I think right now it's using Postgres which Postgres can do a lot of incredible things, but I'm interested to see what happens when you throw millions at it per second. And then if you want to start getting granular aggregations, how it works. And so I think it's exciting, but yeah, definitely alpha.
Can you kind of maybe backtrack for all of this and talk about why you would use open source instead of building it yourself? Or, I mean, you kind of talked about the contribution back to it, but
Yeah.
Just like in general, the why you would want to do this, what challenges you might come up against as well using an open source project like this or any of the other.
Yeah, the challenging question that's really good was how or why I would use open source for these kind of things. I think the big one for me is that it challenged me to think about how the application I'm building can fit into an existing model. And so if I want to use like Spree, for example, if I'm building an e-commerce app for the first time and I haven't modeled that before, I think it's really easy to get some modeling wrong, which everyone gets modeling wrong at the first step, and it's going to evolve. But I think an open source project like Spree is a really great way to bootstrap that and to see how something that's been around, people who have built these before, to learn from them and to use that. And so I think it's pretty applicable when your model fits it, and it's worth looking into. I could see it being more difficult if you have like a novel billing pattern, but I like the idea I like that it challenges me to fit a billing pattern into something that's more generic, because more often than not, like the past two projects I've worked on, I've moved more generic than I have custom, or I've moved towards more of like a model that fits multiple needs, and I've hit friction more so with highly custom plans or rate plans or different kind of product plans to fit needs. At GitHub, we launched a lot of metered products, and one of the big pushes that we're having is making that so that we can do it without custom configuration every time, and that's been largely figuring out models that work for that pattern. And that's kind of where I tied it with open source, where I was looking at something like Lago, and I was like, wow, this is way more simple than what we have modeled, and could it fit? And yes and no, there's some areas that it doesn't fit yet, but I could see it fitting, or I could see inspiration coming out of a project like that into what we're building at GitHub.
And so the point of your last answer to the question was then if this is 50%, then you could go back in and say, okay, I have a different billing model here, maybe I can add this here, and it's a use case that the maintainers could use
Right.
at that point in order to maybe keep to their same roadmap or actually change it based on use.
Right, yeah. Thanks for the question. Does anyone use open source projects in their billing systems? I know Moov has quite a few for like ACH parsing and money movement, I think. I don't work in that domain too much, but I saw some on GitHub. I don't know. We all use them. Yeah, okay. That's the right answer for the conference. Cool. Well, thank you. Thanks for hanging out.